All right, Geoff. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Yvonne, so great to be here with you. Glad to
Yes.
meet you after we've been Facebook friends for a couple of years, and it's great to talk with you.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
We could probably talk for hours because of the work that you do. Listeners have heard kind of the brief intro before we hit record here, but would love you to share a little bit more about your background and the work you do.
Absolutely. So I am a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of Kentucky, and just live outside of Lexington, Kentucky. And I also am a researcher and speaker on the topic of global worker resilience, and also provide member care and training with my wife for the Orthodox Christian Mission Center for our Orthodox long-term missionaries. So that's a little bit about what I'm doing now. Background, I was born in Australia, and we lived in Papua New Guinea and till I was about 5, and then we moved here to Kentucky. So I grew up as a missionary kid. And I remember my dad's an anthropologist. I remember as a young, probably 3 or 4 years old, saying, when I grow up, I want to be a doctor, but a missionary doctor, but not like you. I want to be the kind that helps people. So.
Oh, no. So we have that in common. I grew up as a missionary kid, and my folks were on the border between Thailand and Cambodia. And my wife and I, we're both pre-med. And before we met, and my goal was to be a missionary doctor in Africa. And you know how twists and turns of life, I ended up becoming a counselor. Right. But still have a heart to help missionary families with the challenges of doing that work, serving that way, and also church leadership. So,
Yeah, I think there are a lot of demands that ministry places on families, and then there's a real need for kind of specialized care and support. So for sure.
Yeah. So, how do you provide that support?
So within OCMC, what we do is we provide kind of ongoing regular coaching with people. So just walking with people, tracking with them. And then we also do a little bit of training as well. So I think there's a lot more we could do for sure. So but that kind of side of care and training.
Yeah. So you provide that coaching through online sessions or phone calls?
Yeah, we do it mostly through Zoom. Before the pandemic, we were able to get out and visit people in their homes, in the field, a couple, once or twice a year. We're looking forward to that starting back up again, probably next year. But there's something valuable about being face to face with people. So, but it's amazing how well we can connect with people with Zoom and some of that, the resources that weren't even remotely available a couple of years ago. So,
yeah. So you're working with missionaries. But so are global workers that you work with different than the missionaries? Or those include other things?
Yeah. So this is a good sort of behind the curtain conversation to have. People who so there are a number of countries that we call creative access countries. It means that you can't get a passport to be, you can't get a visa to be in that country as a missionary, as a religious worker. You need a different way to be there, maybe as a teacher or something like that. And so most people who are working in creative access countries won't access material for missionaries because they're concerned about their visa status. And so for me, I have some dear friends who work in some of these places. And so out of just sort of sensitivity to them, I opted a couple of years ago to pivot towards just talking about global workers.
I see. Yeah.
In my mind, it's the same group of people. So
okay. Yeah. So you're working with folks where maybe in countries or cultures where identifying as a missionary wouldn't be safe.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So you're coaching and working with individuals, or do you also apply your marriage and family training? Are you working with couples and families as well?
Yeah, I do work with couples. Some people who just kind of show up here in my office, that I meet with here locally, primarily. So I love working with couples. So I bring a mix of Gottman's perspective and his training, as well as something that my supervisor trained me in called relationship enhancement. It's kind of a relationship skills approach. And then another thing that my supervisor taught me was called filiotherapy, which it's really great. It's equipping parents to do play therapy with their kids.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
It's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's my main work with parents, is helping them learn to be that empathic, caring presence for their kids. It's awesome. So
yeah. So you'll meet with a family, you'll meet with the parents and kind of coach them and teach them the skills.
Filiotherapy is, it's something I'm really passionate about helping global worker families learn, because life is full of transition for missionary families, and so being able to have those skills to come alongside your kids in those moments of transition is great. So what would you want to know? So filiotherapy has kind of 3 core skills. The first skill is just tagging along with your kids. The second is empathy, being able to show understanding, and the third is about setting limits. And so it's without breaking connection, really. And so it's child-centered. The child takes the lead. It takes about 20 minutes once a week for a parent to do. And in about 10 weeks, you see a big change in most kids. It's like my supervisor taught me, how when you're sick, no matter what it is, the doctor's always like, drink extra fluids and get plenty of rest. That's what filiotherapy is.
It's kind of the fundamentals of connection.
What's awesome about it is it helps the parent-child relationship, because parents naturally love their kids, and kids naturally play through their problems and naturally long for the the love and attention of their parents. And so bringing those natural powerful forces together with just a couple of skills is fantastic. So yeah.
So very often when we're anxious or stressed, and we don't know what to do, it doesn't seem so hard or overwhelming if we just know that we have a good connection. But when things get overwhelming and stressed, and then we don't treat each other well, and we feel disconnected and isolated and alone, that's when something painful feels like suffering. So just teaching folks how those skills of empathy, it's great. So can I throw kind of like a scenario at you? Because like a lot of families, they do great with empathy, but then they don't do very well with setting limits, and or discipline, and then just don't like conflict, and then some families are on the other side of things, where the rules and just definitely run a tight ship, but the connection and the kindness and the empathy isn't there. So can you say a little bit about those types of families? Like, how would you work with them?
So I think there's 3 continuums that I think about with family systems. So the first continuum is this continuum between rigidity and chaos, right? And that's kind of what you're talking about, is families that are super structured or super unstructured, right? And then there's another continuum, which is the kind of enmeshment to disengagement. Enmeshment to disengagement. So there's families that are, where it's like, I'm cold, you go put on a sweater, right? They're super enmeshed, or they're totally disengaged from each other. And then I think the third one that I pay attention to is what I call the permeability of the family system. Like how open or closed off are they to others, to the
Yeah.
other, you know? And so, you know, families tend to be rigid and disengaged, or chaotic and enmeshed, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Or you can be, you know, you could be like enmeshed and rigid, but it's more likely that you're going to be enmeshed and that you're going to be enmeshed and chaotic. So, families that are kind of more on the rigid, disengaged tend to be more on the like isolated, and families that are more on the enmeshed and side tend to be more sort of like permeable. So how cohesive, adaptable, permeable are families? And then health, you know, my sense is that health is about moving towards the center. Moving towards the
having
center.
a good balance of structure, but relationship, grace and truth, balancing.
That's right.
That.
Yeah, exactly. So we always want to invite ourselves, invite the family, invite the unit towards center, you know, towards balance. So
yeah. The so with the work that you're doing these days, kind of what's the percentages or balance of your week with couples or families and parents and coaching?
My wife likes to, you know, she's like, oftentimes she'll be like, you know, eventually we're going to have a normal week, you know. It's just, I'm like, I don't think so. I don't think we're ever going to have a normal week. I think
Normal?
that's right. I don't think I think this is normal. And so life fluctuates a lot for me. I would say that, you know, we have one son and we're homeschooling him this year. Now and we did that last year, and that's been great. So that takes up a bit of our time. And then we do kind of, I say part-time for me is the care and training with OCMC for that organization. And that's a role that we raise support for. And it's, you know, there's always stuff happening with that. So, and then a little bit of time is left for like working with individuals and couples. But normally it's just, you know, it's not very many because there's not a lot of time left. And then I speak a bunch on resilience and that research that I did. And so, I don't know. I think that fills up my week. So that's a great answer. But, and then there's, you know, in the midst of it, trying to like, you know, stay calm and connected yourself, you know?
Yes. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
With the research you've done with resilience, how has the last couple of years with COVID and the pandemic, what I guess what more have you been learning about resilience in the last couple of years?
That's a great question. So let me tell you a little backstory and then answer, kind of to get into answering that question. I started working in vocational ministry in 2000, and I was working at a boarding school for naughty kids. So, and I just I had a real, like, you know, I grew up as a missionary kid. I grew up in, you know, multi-generational ministry family. So I had this deep sort of sense of being called into ministry. But that experience in that boarding school, I just had no idea if I was going to make it. It's really hard.
Stressful. Hard.
Yeah, stressful. And, you know, I don't know, you know, like early in your work, you think like, oh, I can get to the bottom of this work if I'll just work harder and harder and harder, and, you know, and you end up burning yourself out. That's exactly what I did. You know? So that's where I got kind of interested in the idea of resilience. I didn't even know what it was then. But I saw like a lot of people who were just burning out. I saw a lot of people ahead of me who didn't really embody that abundant life that Jesus had promised. They were kind of jaded, burned out, just, you know, but there were a few people who really were like persevering with joy. I was like, oh, I want to be like those people, you know. So a couple of years later, I got introduced to the idea of resilience. During my practicum for marriage and family, I was working in one of the jails up the street here. And I was like, oh yeah, that's what those people who that's what they were. They were persevering with joy. They were resilient. And so began to kind of read what I could about missionary resilience specifically. There wasn't a whole lot. And put together a study and got really, really remarkably much better results than I was expecting. So, and if I were to I think we had like about 900 participants in the survey, which like the spreadsheet on that's like almost 100,000 cells. And then there was a written interview. We had like almost 250 people participate in that. It's like 650 pages. It's like a lot of data. It's probably the largest data set on the topic that I'm aware of. So, and if I kind of boiled all that down into like its essence, it would be this, that like we must receive Jesus's resilience to join him in his mission in this world. And we do that as we turn toward God, self, and others for loving support. So I'll repeat that. So we must receive Jesus's resilience to join him in his mission in this world. And we do that as we turn toward God, others, and ourselves for loving support. And so that all that backstory is to say that a lot of times I think we think about resiliency as grit. It's just like,
just toughening it out.
Toughening it out. And in ministry, what happens is like we face, it's like you'll face one pretty significant obstacle, challenge in one area of your life, and another in another area of your life, and another in another area of your life. And all of a sudden it's like generalized and it's overwhelmed and life is insurmountable. And the way through is not grit. It's not grit, and so I think what's happened with COVID has been just to like accentuate that for all of us. This pandemic has accentuated that, like, whatever we had happening in our lives before has just been compounded now by this, the global pandemic and the repercussions of that. And I think we all have a deep sense that we cannot do this in our own strength, in our own power, in our own will.
Yes. What used to work didn't, or stopped, or at some point you hit the wall, it hit the limits of the grit.
And so that's why, so when we talk about Jesus's resilience, this is kind of a theological point, but what we're really talking about is his resurrection life, right? Is there anything more resilient than the resurrection?
Right. Oh, well, overcoming death is pretty powerful.
That's right. There it is, And so, Paul says in Romans that the same spirit that raised Jesus from the dead is alive in you. And so, like, man, our grit will get us far, but it won't get us across the finish line. And to get us across the finish line, we have to like tap in to like Jesus's resurrection life. And his resurrection becomes real for us, not something that we just commemorate, or but it's like, no, it's like real, and it becomes real in our moments of resilience, our moments of bouncing back
in the day-to-day and week to week of school and work and in our homes. What does that look like?
So I think so. What came out real clear in the data is this turning toward God, turning toward others, and turning towards ourselves. And so I have, when it comes to turning toward God, what that looked like really clearly was two things. One was recognizing like our resilience begins in God's nature and who God is. And for a lot of people, it was not about God's sovereignty or deliverance from adversity, but it was his presence in it. Jesus, who is Emmanuel, and part of that is also recognizing that, like, this is, and we all do this in ministry and in life. We do our mission for God. And instead it's like, no, God has a mission in this world that he is inviting us to be a part of. That like our life is a thread in the tapestry of this meta narrative of salvation history that's unfolding, and it's critical to it, but it's a strand,
Yeah.
One of the practices that I saw a lot of that I needed to adopt myself was the practice of lament. I realized that like a third of the Psalms are Psalms of lament, but I was not actually very good at lamenting. I was not very good at being honest with God about the pain and the anger and the frustration and the disappointment. And so the way the day-to-day practice I took on with that was I'd go take a hike. And actually, so there's some research out of Japan on forest therapy, and it talks about how like you need a minimum of 2 hours. And so I kind of took that as my cues. I'm like a 2-hour hike. And there's something about being in the woods where you're just around life, and life that's been there and will be there for centuries, that sort of is itself settling, and then being able just to kind of cry out all of my real frustrations and real disappointments and real like anger and angst about whatever this present situation is. And then once I'm kind of got it all out of my system, I'll pause and I'll pray and I'll ask, Lord Jesus, what do you think about the situation? I just wait and I listen. And then after a little while, I'll pause and I'll pray. Lord Jesus, what are you going to do about the situation? And I'll wait and I'll listen. And then I'll say thank you, express my gratitude. And I'll also remember God's past faithfulness to me. So like I didn't end up in this particular situation by happenstance. This isn't the first time I faced something that seemed insurmountable. And there's always been a way, and good has always come. And I remember that God has been good to me personally. And so that kind of practice of lament has been really valuable. I think that like too often we feel like God will only receive the good that we have to bring. And it's like, no, God will receive all that we have to bring.
Yeah.
And he will transform it, and fill it with his life and his goodness.
It's so good to remember God's faithfulness in the past. And so even when we face things we've never faced before, like a global pandemic, God does provide and take care of us. It's for therapy. I took a course, a continuing ed course on anxiety within the age of the internet, 24/7 internet, and it talked about the research about how being out in nature, the effect on our brain, and it can kind of balance out or undo kind of the negative effects of in this study it was about video games, and so and real actual nature, not YouTube video
of the metaverse.
Yes, not the metaverse, not the virtual forest, but a real actual forest was needed for this effect. So you're you did that extensive research on resilience. The for folks that don't share the same worldview or faith in Christ, how would you apply the principles of what you've learned? How could they benefit from your research?
Yeah, that's a great question. I didn't talk about the kind of turning towards others and ourselves, and those are both really important. Um, and so obviously this is a research with people who are in ministry. And so it's looking at, and so for them, that sense of calling that, God has called me to this was really, really critical. There is certainly a lot of good secular research out there that looks at resiliency as well. I'm not sure. I'm not sure, how would I frame that up? Because most of the people I'm talking with are people who come from a Christian professional ministry framework. So it's hard to understand how that would work. I think we all have a sense of connection to life, connection to higher power, connection to something outside of ourselves, that I think is pretty essential to life. That like I'm not sure how we can do life without that connection to something that is beyond ourselves. So I think
Yes.
that seems pretty non-negotiable to me. Now whether that's
Christian and non-Christian alike. I forget who said this, but like humans were meaning making machines.
Yes.
I think in relation to narrative and story is that we're just with the popularity of like Star Wars and Lord of the Rings, like the hero's journey, and we're all trying to make sense and find meaning and purpose with what we're going through in life. The so tell me a little bit about the work you do with couples, Geoff.
Yeah, this is a conversation I'm excited about having with you, because I was thinking like, this is so fun to have two couples counselors, and let's talk about about the work with couples and what it's like. So I use Gottman's model, and then I also use something called relationship enhancement, and so which is basically the skills of empathy, the skills of expression, the skills of communicating with one another. And that is so like those two, and I think EFT is also really, really valuable in this. That triad is a really strong top triad, where when a couple comes to counseling, it's because they're divided against each other by the demands that they're facing in their life.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just like, they're kind of against each other. And what couples counseling does is it creates, invites this movement where they can kind of come together towards those demands that they're facing. Mm-hmm. And so most of the time, I think what couples want is they come in wanting you to fix the problem from their perspective, which is to fix their spouse, right? That's what we all are just like, if you'll just fix them, then everything will be fine, and instead it's like, well, let's invite you to kind of, come together against this instead of being divided by it. And so part of that is, there's Gottman's model begins with an oral history interview. And for me, I am paying attention to two things. One is their resiliency story. Like every couple has faced hard times before. They show up in sit on your couch. And so how did they get through those hard times before? And the second thing I'm paying attention to is their miracle story. There's always a miracle in how these two people decided to build a life together. Always, and when couples are able to identify those two things, and be reminded of it themselves, like, oh yeah, there's a miracle in why we decided to build a life together, and we've made it through hard times before, that just like fills their life with hope.
Yeah, that's exactly the word that popped into my head as you're describing that.
Yeah.
It seems so hopeful.
Yes.
And I love that. The just trying to remember or identify the miracle. That just immediately made me feel happy just to
Right.
think about. My wife and I, we we got engaged before our first date. So from the start it's kind of like, this is not the usual, this is not normal.
Right. Right.
And so yeah, kind of miraculous. And so uh hope, definitely, without hope it feels dead. It feels pretty bleak. And sometimes you know this, sometimes the hope is gone or pretty low by the time you come to counseling. So
Absolutely.
infusing just a little bit, um
Yeah.
it and that I like that picture of um uh being side by side, and facing outward towards the problem, not the problem being between uh the couple. That's a huge shift to make.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Otherwise you think that I just have to get rid of the problem and that's the solution. It's like, no, I have to change my posture to this problem.
Yes. Yeah.
That's the solution. So,
Yeah. I try it with EFT. The problem is the pattern, is
right.
the dance,
Right.
and the kind of the demon dialogues, or like the attachment
Right.
issue. And so when we can help couples shift from the other person is the problem versus the problem is the problem,
Yep.
that's big.
Yep.
Yeah. The w- what are some other things that you like in your work with couples that you enjoy?
Yeah. I love teaching skills to couples. Like for me, that was a huge paradigm shift in my marriage. Like before this idea of skills, I just kind of was like, basically I was like, people either have a good relationship or they have a bad relationship. And I have a relationship that's good when it's good and bad when it's bad. And it was just so like,
Not much control there.
yeah,
Or
no internal locus of control responsibility. The idea of skills was wonderful. It was like, oh, you learn skills in every aspect of your life, and like you can be skilled or unskilled in your relationship. And all of a sudden it opened up this possibility of being able to say, Kriss, that was unskilled, can I try that again? Wow. And it was just like, oh, and I think most people don't learn the skills of how to really listen and how to really speak. And they, and so that's kind of my, I don't know how, that's my beef with some of the active listening kind of material, is that it just sort of shows you how to look like you're paying attention instead of really connecting with one another. And when a couple is able to like, I mean, it's like, there's a like I had a couple in here this morning. It was like, I mean, the transformation in them is unbelievable. And it's just like they're listening and they're speaking in a way that they haven't for a couple of years. So, and I don't know. I think the metaphor for me is like a plant that's struggling. And like you don't look at a plant that's struggling and say like, oh man, what's wrong with the plant? You know, you look at it, or like say, let's look at all the dead leaves that are on this plant. Wow, let's really diagnose it. It's like, no, the plant needs the right amount of sun, the right amount of water, the right amount of nutrients,
Mm.
and then it'll thrive. You know, and our relationships are the same. Like the pain in them is so often the hunger pain of the absence of the good.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
And so when you get to that point, so much of what you're experiencing is the negative.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. That's all. Yeah. And so just being able to like help people, and you think if I can just get rid of the negative, then everything will be okay. And it's like, no, you've got to actually get some goodness back into your life to bring the negative into perspective.
Mm.
You know?
Yes. Yeah.
Yep.
I'm curious, Geoff, your thoughts on forgiveness and trust in marriage counseling.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like how that topic comes up, or like
Right.
do you bring it up, or how do you help couples work through when there's been like not just hurt and disappointment, but actual like
Betrayal.
ruptures of trust and betrayal. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. I need to think about how that's come up recently. I think my gut on this is that it is uh, we need to make space that's safe to be hurt, you know, to have low trust. And we also need to make space for there to be repair and for things to be restored. Yeah, so I think that my Christian circles can create a sort of like you just need to like forgive and forget attitude that's really not helpful, right? And I don't know, have you I'm kind of rambling a little bit here, but that's all right. Have you ever seen Danny Silk's Keep Your Love On?
I've seen his social media posts
Okay.
sometimes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
He has a nice book.
Very positive. Yeah.
Keep Your Love On. He has an idea in there of like these circles of trust. And it's this idea that like, we keep people at the space that they're safe to be at. And I think a lot of our relational problems are problems about not having the right distance between us and other people, either having too much distance or not enough. And so, yeah, and in our relationships, we need to have the right space for it to be safe. But there's also in there an attitude of like, the door is like, the boundary's there, but it's open. Like you can like earn trust. And you could grow, and this can change. How does that, yeah. Well, I'm curious on your thoughts about that.
Oh, I like that. Like that just, it kind of reminds me of what you said earlier about permeability, where, like that trust and a byproduct of the trust is the connection. It fluctuates.
Right.
And I think it helps to communicate with each other that like you like what we do, and that's part of taking responsibility for your actions, is what you do affects trust, and it affects how safe your spouse feels and how connected your spouse feels. So you're not just entitled to trust or respect. So part of taking responsibility is being
trustworthy.
Being trustworthy and being aware of, as part of the empathy is understanding like, oh, when I do that,
Mhm.
it hurts my wife, or it's frustrating or disappointing, and coming up with uh, a solution to restore and repair the trust that's been broken. So sometimes it is big B betrayal that we help couples with, but sometimes it's the small things in the day to day when we don't follow up with what we say what we're gonna do, or we break agreements about budget, or
Right.
our schedule, our calendar,
Right.
and with and yeah, that's for a lot of couples lately, especially with the pace of life, is getting on the same page and feeling safe, um, and connected. It takes time. It takes communication, and very often we're so busy and distracted by other things that um, we lose that strong, secure connection with our spouse.
Yeah.
And so half of the week I'm a health coach, half of the week I do counseling. So it overlaps and bleeds, and sometimes I talk with couples just about time management and prioritizing time together.
Right.
Yeah. So the oh man, uh time flew today, and
Time
and
management.
and and we I want to talk more about you with you sometime, Geoff, about um uh how you support missionaries,
Yeah.
and kind of the challenges they face, or ministry leaders face. um uh but we're running out of time today. Before we sign off, how can listeners learn more about you and
Yeah.
connect with you?
Let me let me answer that question, and I want to share like one or two things that have been on my mind
Oh,
for this
yes.
talk. So
Yeah.
so you can go to Linktr.ee / Geoff Whiteman. You can probably put that in the show notes.
Yes.
But that's GEOFF and then Whiteman, just the way I look, WHITEMAN. And that's where all of my links are live. If you're interested in downloading my research, I do a workshop once a month or so where I kind of walk through the resiliency stuff, and with real focus on kind of application. What do we do with this? And that's you can go to resilientglobalworker.org, and that'll take you there. So yeah, I would look forward to connecting with people and supporting them. So I think our conversations led me to kind of two things I wanted to, they've just been on my mind to share with you. So,
Yes.
and so one is this, when thinking about couples and thinking about the pandemic, thinking about ministry, and just thinking about these places where we overlap. One is this, I would call it a kind of sacramental worldview that I think is just so foundational to the work that we do. And so the best way to describe this is in like, is in the Eucharist, where like the Eucharist doesn't begin with like us offering to God bread and wine and him receiving it and turning it into his body and his blood and offering it back to us. It begins really with God's offering of all things to us, right? The wheat and the grapes and the sun and the water and the yeast, the salt, and like all of life, and then we kind of take all that, we receive it, we work on it, we turn it into something other, into this bread and into this wine, and then we offer it back to God. And God receives it and offers it to us as himself, his body and his blood. Jesus says, unless you abide in me and I abide in you, you will bear no fruit. He offers it back to us, and then we offer our lives as we go out into the world. And that Eucharistic sacramental mentality is so foundational to what we do, that like because we receive our whole life, we offer our whole life back, and it's the like, we offer the like, like you and me are marriage counselors, and and we like, and I know if you're like me, it's like, man, I need the stuff that I
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm not a marriage counselor because I got it figured out perfectly, you know. It's
Mm,
like, yeah, and it's like, no, we bring our real life, you know, we receive our real life, we offer our real life, and God takes our real life and turns it into something different.
mm,
You know, we offer that different thing back. And so much, I think, of the work that we do is about inviting people to receive their life, accept it, and offer back.
mm,
So, so that's been, I think that mentality is really, I don't know, I think there's some real, like,
mm.
there's something there for us.
That
So,
that what you just described, Jeff,
yeah.
is a picture of resurrection and transformation.
Yes.
Yeah, I like that. Like
Yeah.
the
100%.
parts of our life, however broken or
Yeah.
incomplete or inadequate, whatever.
Yeah.
But God does transform it and make it something worth sharing.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
that's the power of like internal family systems.
Mm,
It's just like this way of like, oh, you know, I need to befriend these parts of me.
mm,
I need to be empathic to these parts of me that I have hated, you
mm,
know, and see what's going on in them? What do they really need? How do I invite them, you know, into the fullness of adulthood?
mm, mm.
So yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and the last thing I wanted to share was something that I've really learned a lot in this pandemic, and that is about what does it really mean to pursue, like, what does peace really mean in our relationships? You know, so,
Mm,
so I'm part of the Orthodox Church, and part of our, like, in order to take communion, there are 4 qualifications. One is that you, like prayer, fasting, recent confession, and that you're at peace with your neighbor. You know, and so I've really been wrestling with like, well, what does it mean for me to be at peace with my neighbor?
mm,
Because there are some people in, you know, in this congregation who, like, you know, whose view on politics is like other than mine in a profound way.
mm,
There are people in this congregation whose view on the pandemic is other than mine in a profound way, in a way that, like, I like, peace here is not the absence of conflict. That's not what it is, you know. And so I don't know how to be at peace with, you know, with some of these people in my life
mm,
in this pandemic. Like, it's really brought to the surface, man, there's some people I am not at peace with.
mhm,
And so as I really kind of like, so that's really like led me to really wrestle with like, how do I, like, what does it mean to be at peace? What does it mean to be at peace? And I think, and I want to say, I know we both got to go, so I'll say these 4 points real fast. The first one is recognizing that peace isn't the absence of conflict. It has to be, you know, somehow connected to like Jesus's peace. He says, you know, Jesus says, like, you know, like, my peace I give to you, not as the world gives, do I give, you know, my peace I give to you. It has to be somehow connected to God's shalom, God's reigning peace, when like all things will thrive, you know, when all needs will be met, you know, that sort of that new day that we await, right? And then what I've realized is there are kind of maybe 3 or 4 steps that I can take to pursue peace with somebody that I have a lot of conflict with. The first is I can just desire the good for them.
mm,
That's it. Just first is desire the good for them. And I found the most effective way to do that is just to pray for them as if they were my friend, to pray that God would bless them and their work and their life and their family and just all the good things in their, you know, would give them all the good things of this life and the life to come. And that I would pray for them, not as, you know, sometimes we triangulate with God, you know, we're like, hey, God, you know, will you take my side? And, you know, will you show them how wrong they are? And will you help them to change? It's like,
right.
just pray for them like you're their friend.
Mm.
And you don't mean any of it at all. It's like through gritted teeth. But when you keep doing it, your heart softens.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Buddhists, they practice something called loving kindness meditation,
Yeah.
and it's very much like that.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Yep.
Mhm.
And then the second, you got to go. The second, I'll do this real quick. Or do you want to call it?
Oh,
Call it?
go ahead.
I want to be okay.
Yeah.
when I have found when I say that prayer physically on my knees, it's really powerful. When I pray for the good of the other, literally like kneel down in a posture like repentance and humility, is really, really powerful. And then the second thing is, after we desire the peace, we can pursue the peace. And when we pursue the peace, it's adding a prayer, which is, Lord, is there anything I can do to bring about the good in this person's life? And when we can take that action secretly, it's really efficacious. It's really powerful when we can pursue good for somebody else in quiet and secret, so that, anonymously. It's really, really powerful. Mm-hmm. And then finally, we can sacrifice for the good of the other. And to me, that's where we can enter into constructive conflict with people.
Yeah. That's good. Whether it's someone you're at odds with in church, or online, or in your family, in your own home, those ways of pursuing and practicing peace and sacrificing for the other, those are really helpful, Geoff. Thank you for sharing those.
Yeah, I'll
have to chew on those more.
That's been one of the things that I've taken away that's been good out of this pandemic for me personally. Hey, Savan, it's been awesome to be with you today.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
So
yes, and I hope we can schedule another time to talk more about the work that you're doing.
Do that.
Yes.
Yeah, likewise.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.